Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
Genesis moves really fast, right? It's very terse, and so a lot happens in one parsha. So we only read the first third, or sometimes the first few sentences of a parsha, and so there's this huge hunk of stuff that happens that we don't know about, and we pick up after that, right? So in Lech Lecha, we read about Avram and Sarai at that point, right? Heading out. There is a famine. Avram goes down to Egypt and sojourns there. We have the incident of Pharaoh taking Sarai into his harem, because Abraham has passed her off as his sister so that they don't kill him and take her. So she is taken into Pharaoh's harem. Then they get gone from there with lots of stuff and lots of camels and lots of people and lots of good stuff that Pharaoh sends them out with, because a plague has come on Pharaoh's palace for taking a married woman into his palace. And what else happens? So we have Lot, right? Lot is the nephew of Avram. They both are so successful now that they have to split. They have to part ways. Then we have this incident of Avraham as warrior. He makes an allegiance, an alliance with 5 kings, and they fight a successful battle against, you got to love some of these Hebrew names. Kedar La'amor is the guy they beat. All right, so all of this happens at the end of Lech Lecha. Also what happens is Hagar. Remember the incident with Hagar and Ishmael?
Didn't Hagar go out into the wilderness?
She did, and she comes back. Remember the angel? She meets an angel, and the angel tells her to come back. All right, so all of that has happened. Where we pick up right now is at the end. So at the end of Lech Lecha, the previous parsha, Avraham is told by God he's now Avraham, right? So we added, remember last week we talked about a hey gets added to Avram and he becomes Avraham. And Sarai, that yud is changed to a hey as well, so she is now Sarah. So now we have Avraham and Sarah. They have Yahweh-sized their names. Right? Okay. Yud Hey Vav Hey, taking the Heys from Yud Hey Vav Hey, they are now more Yahwist names. Right? Worshippers of Yud Hey Vav Hey.
So Hagar, that happened up to
Hagar what?
Hagar, that whole thing when she went out and blah 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 and cried and they just said come back. That has happened somewhere between our last week's portion and this. Okay.
It's part of last week's parsha, but we only get to the first third because we're in the first year of the triennial reading. Exactly.
But
Okay.
what was the reason that the names were changed?
So it's a religious, whenever we talk about some kind of conversion, we're talking about, right, identity, we're talking about changing our names, right? So when Yaakov gets changed from Yaakov to Yisrael, right, you will no longer be called Yaakov because he has had a religious transformation in his wrestling with
Right.
fill in the blank. Those of us who've been studying that story together a long time, right? Fill in the blank what he's actually wrestling with, but he understands it as having encountered the divine, and so now, right, he is Yisrael, the one who wrestles El.
Right.
Yeah? Right. Who's El?
Big Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Big Daddy's
All right. Because if you want the worshipers of El to worship Yud Hey Vav Hey, you need to keep that name.
My name got changed too.
Right? Of course.
Was the El ever used in other tribes or in other parts?
Yes. El was the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon. So if you want those Canaanites to be now worshipers of Yud Hey Vav Hey and Israelite, you need to keep the Christmas tree. Right? You have to give them something they're familiar with. You just reconstruct who El is, what El means. All right.
The significance of names is just so beautiful.
The huge significance to names. All right, so Yishmael, So Avraham is told to take Yishmael at the end of Parshat Lech Lecha and every male in his household, and he is to circumcise Yishmael, the men of the house, and he is to circumcise himself. That happens at the very end of Lech Lecha. Thus, Abraham and his son Yishmael were circumcised on that day. All his household, his houseborn slaves, and those that had been brought from outside were circumcised with him. Right? Okay.
Many people just cross the
So, how old is Abraham now?
75?
No, older, 91.
He was 75 when he left Haran.
Oh,
So he's now in his 90s.
okay.
Now, he is not a surgeon. He has no, presumably, surgical implements, right? And he's told to circumcise himself in his 90s.
That picture doesn't come into focus.
Right. So for some of you, it will be more painful to imagine than others of us. But Parshat Vaera, therefore, begins immediately after. It's important to remember this. Immediately after the circumcision. All right? I mean, or that's all we hear about. Now, look, it could be 6 weeks, it could be 2 months, it could be, we don't know. But for the rabbis, it's important that the very next thing after the circumcision is our parsha, is what happens right now. Okay? All right. So let's have Bert. Would you read the beginning of Vaera?
The Lord appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them. And bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said."
All right. So we have the circumcision. The very next word we have is Vaera. What is Vaera?
And appeared?
Appeared. So working with the verb to see, this is the verb for to cause to be seen. So God causes God's self to be seen. God, Vaera, God appears. Elav, to him. To who? To Abraham. Right? Be'elonei Mamre, by the terebinths of Mamre. So we are dealing with a grove, right, of trees. Often if you had a grove of trees, one tree standing apart becomes the sacred tree to Asherah, to the goddess. So there's a mixed history with groves of trees, but clearly this is a famous grove of trees, and most likely there had been many stories about the patriarch, about Abraham and these, or the leader, right, the patriarchal leader and the grove, because it seems it uses the definite article, the trees of Mamre, so they are known. They are. No one has to explain where they are, what they look like. Everybody knows what these are. And as I said last time I taught this parsha, we think probably also this grove would have been associated with Sarai, right? That, you know, if we're talking about Asherah, we're talking about the goddess, we're talking about Sarai as princess, as priestess, then we are probably talking about a sacred history about these terebinths with Sarai. And then when it's an Israelite story, of course, it becomes now about the patriarch, it becomes about Abraham. So he's sitting there, kechom hayom, at the very hottest part of the day. All right, so Israel, those of you who have gone in July, all right, at the hottest part of the day, right, it is intense. It is very intense. So he's sitting petach ohel. He's sitting at the opening of the tent. Abraham is a sheikh. Abraham is wealthy. When you think of his tent, don't think about what we take camping on a canoe trip. When you think of his tent, think of a Bedouin tent. Think of a compound. It is a huge tent, Abraham's tent. So if you've ever been to a Bedouin tent and you are welcomed in for a meal, you have a sense of what that is like. That's what Abraham is in. His compound with the big tent where guests would have been welcomed and the whole household would have been fed, right? Lying on cushions, and right? Okay. So if that's what's happening, he's just been circumcised, possibly, and it's the heat of the day, and you're in this big tent, where are you going to be in that tent?
Taking rest.
Where?
In the shade.
In the shade. Where are you not going to be?
In the sun.
Petach ha'ohel.
At the door.
You are not going to be sitting at the door. You're not going to be sitting at the opening. It's hot. Really hot. You are going to be lying down in the middle somewhere where it's really cool. The flaps are open, so air is coming through. Your servants are bringing you things, right? They're peeling your grapes, all of that stuff. Fanning you. All of that stuff, right? And so, like, Abraham's sitting at Petach HaOhel, at the opening of the tent. So already the rabbis are like, why? Right? This is an engraved invitation for the rabbis. Why is Abraham sitting at the entrance of the tent? Any guesses? I know Bert knows.
Because he told me.
We've studied this a few times.
He has a job to welcome.
So he is a man of hospitality. So even if he has a job to welcome, he has servants to make sure that people are welcomed and brought to his tent. Why is Abraham sitting at the entrance of the tent? So it's that important that what?
He be there.
That he be the one to greet guests, to greet what's going to turn out to be strangers. He's looking for opportunities to be hospitable and to be a host. This is where the rabbis go. He's anxiously sitting at the petach, so he is sure not to miss anybody who might be passing by. Welcome back. Nana. Don't take such a big break again, all right? So he's there to make sure he doesn't miss the opportunity to welcome someone and bring them into his tent. This is how important hospitality is. But it's even more important, as we're going to see. All right, so what happens next? Vayisa enav. He lifts his eyes. We know about this, don't we? Because what happens with Hagar, Jody?
Right. Yes.
Hagar lifts her eyes, and what does she see when she lifts her eyes? Oh my God. The water, the well of water, life-giving water. So Yisa enav, lifting up the eyes in Torah, is a purposeful act that allows us to see what. Thank you for the affirmation. So lifting the eyes in Torah is about purposefully seeing in a way that allows us to see what might have been there all along. It doesn't say God created a well, or God dug a well, or well exist, right? It just says she lifted her eyes and saw the well. So it is very possible the well was there all the time, and it's not until she was able to lift her gaze in a certain way that she was able to see it. Possibly that's what's happening here. What we know is it's the same idea. Abraham lifts his eyes, and Vayisa enav, vayar, and he sees. So now he's right like Hagar. He sees. V'hinei, and how do we translate hine? Yo, right? In English, they often use an L. I think it's lame. And lo, right? Okay. And yo, what's there? Shlosha anashim nitzavim alav. There are 3 men. Remember Parshat Nitzavim in Deuteronomy? Like we talk about standing, but standing like a pillar, like a statue. Nitzav. To be, I always forget the English word. What do you do to a pillar? You don't stand it up. What do you do to it? You erect it. So that's the sense of this word. But the Hebrew is interesting. Shlosha anashim nitzavim alav. 3 men are standing alav. What's alav literally?
Nearby.
Huh?
Nearby.
Alav. On him.
On him?
On. Yud Vav makes it him. Alav. On him. Yes. So.
It could mean close.
It could mean on his
Could mean close.
They're there.
They're there.
In his
Can't
face.
not.
In his face. All right, so what happened? He's sitting at Petach HaOhel. He controls the entire territory. How is it that all of a sudden 3 men are on top of him?
They're not men.
They're not men. Okay, so already we have an indication in the Hebrew that something's fishy here, right? Something's up. This is not normal. He would have seen them coming from a distance. But if they're not men, if they're something else, they could all of a sudden just appear. Just be there.
Supernatural.
Supernatural.
Feverish.
All right.
Or he fell asleep.
And Laura Diamond, thank you for chiming in with the practical interpretation that it is possible he was taking too much oxy and he fell asleep, and next thing you know,
From pain.
3 guys are standing at the entrance to his tent.
He was
Okay.
also recuperating. He could have been like in pain.
That's what I'm saying. Like, right, he was doing too much oxy and, was out of it, or he's just like, okay. So we don't know. What we know is suddenly 3 men are, the Hebrews on top of him. Like in English, we say that like, I say it to my daughter sometimes, you're on top of me, like back up, right? So, all right, so what happens? So Vayar, again we get the word Vayar, he sees. Vayaratz likratam, and he runs to greet them, mi petach ha'ohel, from the opening of the tent. Vayishtachu arza. And what is the appropriate thing to do if you want to acknowledge the status of someone else in the ancient Near East? You bow down to the knees, forehead to the ground. Right? So this is what Abraham does. He runs from the entrance of the tent to greet them. That shows their status right there. The host is leaving his abode to go greet them, as you would with royalty. If royalty is coming to your house, you don't sit and wait for them to knock, right? You go meet them. You're anxiously awaiting them, and so you go meet them. And he bows to the ground to acknowledge their status and the fact that they are what? Welcome at in his territory.
And he has no idea who they are.
He has no idea who they are. No idea.
He's still humbling himself by bowing.
100%. He's signaling humility. He's signaling safety. He's signaling you are welcome. You have status. You have standing here. Vayomer. Next thing he does is he says, what? Adonai. Im na matzati chen be'enecha. Adonai. If I have found favor in your sight, al na ta'avor me'al avdecha. Please do not pass by your servant. All right. What is with this? What is with the address here? Adonai.
That's weird. It's strange.
It's strange. Why is it strange?
Well, we've already said they're not necessarily men. We don't know what they are, but Adonai is God.
Ahaha.
He's proclaiming who he is if he says Adonai to start.
All right.
Yes.
You're my man.
When we read Adonai in the Torah, in Hebrew, when we read Adonai, what are the letters we have for Adonai?
Yud Hey Vav.
It is vocalized Adonai because we can't say this. This is unpronounceable. Right? For those of you who don't read Hebrew, this is the equivalent in English. You can't say it. It is purposeful. We've talked about this a lot in here. It is purposeful that you can't say it. It's designed to be ineffable.
Unknowable.
Because it points to the ineffable. All right. So but we have to do something when we get to that word in Torah. If we're chanting Torah, you can't just skip it. We say Adonai. Right? Here's the abbreviation, Yud Yud, right? So we put the vowels for Adonai under Yud He Vav He. Yeah? This is how the mispronunciation Jehovah comes about. They look at the vowels for Adonai and try to pronounce them with these letters. Another aha moment at KI's Torah study. So that's how the pronouncing of Yud He Vav He as Yehovah comes about, because they're looking at the vowels. Okay? For Adonai. Why? Okay, well, it doesn't matter. All right. So.
Can you just clarify line 3? I mean, it starts with Vayomer Adonai, and written out Adonai, not Yehovah.
Dana, are you getting ahead of me? Oh, all right. Stay with me. Trust me. All right. So Yud He Vav He, that's what we usually see. That's what we're reading, Yud He Vav He as Adonai. But that's not what we have written in verse 3, is it, Dana? What do we have written in verse 3? The word, Adonai. The actual letters, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. What is Adon? Adon Olam Asher Malach. What's Adon? Master. How do you say my master? Adoni, my master. How do you say plural? My masters. Adonai. Ha'adonim sheli. My masters. Adonai. Adoni is my master. Which is this?
Master.
How do we know? How do we know it's plural? Huh?
Oh.
What, Dana?
Because
there are no vowels in the Torah, people.
Yeah.
Is it Adoni? Is it Adonai? We don't know. We have to decide how to vocalize it. Everybody who would have brain's moving faster than the mouth. Anyone who would have read these texts, anyone who would have listened to these texts, anybody who would have written down these texts would have known how to vocalize Adoni or Adonai based on the context. Our problem is there are 3 men. Mm-hmm. So you would think it's what?
Plural.
Adonai, plural, my masters. Mm-hmm. If it please you, don't pass by your servant, right? What's the problem? Why can't we just go, well, of course? What's the problem? What's the verb for don't pass by? Al na ta'avor. Ta'avor is masculine singular. Now we have a problem. If it's Adonai, then Al ya'avru. It should be plural. Don't pass by your servant. But it's vocalized Adonai, but it probably should be Adoni, my master. Don't pass me by, masculine singular. Right? Then it would line up and it would make more sense. And in that case, he would be talking to one of them. Maybe Chief Mysterious Dude, right, is who he's talking to. The one who looks like the boss.
So is the Hebrew ta'avor with different, without the vowel, that could not also be ta'avor? No. There's not anything all.
You'd need a vav. And it wouldn't be a tav in front of it. It would be a yud. Y'all. You plural would start with a yud, not a tav. The verb is ayin vet resh, avor. That tav is singular, masculine, command form. Don't do that. It's the do that part of don't do that. Yeah? That was, I'm sure, clear as mud. Okay. So, all right. So, where are the rabbis going to go with this?
The text. See if there's a parallel.
So you could look at other texts to see if there are parallels. We don't have any that we know of. The rabbis cannot ignore that says Adonai. Are you kidding me right now? They cannot ignore that it says Adonai. So where are they going to go? Vayomer. Vowels are everything. And what else have we decided? Punctuation is everything. Right? Let's eat, comma, grandma is very different from let's eat, grandma, comma, save lives. All right. So if we change, right? If we change the punctuation, if we add a comma, Vayomer, he says, whoa, getting tippy. He says, right? Vayomer. If we add a comma, what's the next word?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Comma. What does this do? He says, comma, Adonai, comma.
Is this Adonai is talking?
He's talking to God. The rabbis can't pass by the fact that it says Adonai here. They just can't. So now what's happening? How does this change what's going on? Vayomer Adonai, and he says to Adonai, capital Aleph, capital, we don't have capitals in Hebrew, right? Capital A, Imna matzati chen be'enecha, if I have found favor in your sight, your eyes, al na ta'avor me'al avadecha, don't leave, don't pass by your servant.
He's not talking to the three visions or men. He's talking to
If he's talking to God, what's he saying?
stay here.
Stay here. Stay here. Don't leave.
Are the three men gone? Is it just a vision?
Let's just hold. Let's just hold where we are. So don't leave. Yukach na me'et mayim birachatzu raglechem. Now he turns to the three men and says, take a bit of water and wash your legs and sit under the tree. And I'll go get a little morsel of bread, right? So that y'all can have a nice picnic lunch, right? Seeing that you have come your servant's way. And they replied, that sounds terrific. Thank you so much, right? So for the rabbis, why does God appear here? Vayera elav Adonai, in the beginning of our parsha. What is God doing here?
He's a support.
Because
He doesn't understand what's going on.
So Abraham's just been circumcised. By himself. He did it himself.
They made a covenant.
So then God appears to Abraham. What is God doing here? Bikur cholim.
Comforting him, visiting.
He's visiting the sick. God is visiting the sick. God is performing the mitzvah of bikur cholim. Duh, like when somebody you love is hurting and they're wounded and injured, you go visit them. So that's what God's doing here, say the rabbis. So what does Abraham say? Abraham says, Vayomer Adonai imna matzati chen beinecha. So Abraham says to God, stay here. I got to go take care of some strangers and feed them and wash their feet. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. Right? I'll be right back.
So he's putting aside his own comforting.
He's putting aside his own comforting.
Right.
He's putting aside God. He's putting aside an encounter with divinity. Divinity has come to his house.
Hold on, I have another phone.
Hold on, I have another call coming in.
To go help others. To go be of service.
To go be of service to
others.
Strangers. So for the rabbis, this is a teaching about not only the importance of Bikur Cholim, even the divine does Bikur Cholim. And for the rabbis, by the way, God always does Bikur Cholim. And so if you go to visit a sick person, it says in the Talmud, you are going to sit at the feet of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is at the head of the bed of every sick person. So you are actually going to visit with the sick person and the divine when you go to do Bikur Cholim. So it's not just about Bikur Cholim, how important it is to visit and comfort the sick. That's big enough that God does it, God's self. That's already pretty huge. What's bigger? Even than an encounter with God, even than being with God, God's self, what's more important than that? Going to be of service to the stranger. Right. So if we were to translate into our time and into our society, who's the stranger? Yeah. Who's the stranger? Who is the stranger in this context, in the ancient world, in the ancient Near East? Who's the stranger?
From another country, from another place.
Another country, another place.
The immigrant.
The immigrant.
The ger.
The ger.
The stranger.
And what is that? So we define a stranger, a ger, in this context as someone who has no protection of clan. Oh. Right? That is who is vulnerable in this world. That is why hospitality to the stranger in all of these cultures to this day, among the Bedouins and other traditional peoples who have been semi-nomadic, pastoralists, to this day, the most important, even higher than a value, what is it? The most important thing is hospitality. Because you're vulnerable. And if anybody is allowed to hurt a guest in your house, nobody is safe when they travel. This is what Sodom and Gomorrah is about, by the way. Sodom and Gomorrah is not about sodomy and not about homosexuality. Absolutely not. It is 100% about this. It is about the fact that the guests were going to be violated. They were going to be taken from the host's house and violated. That's the big thing that got Sodom and Gomorrah. That was the evidence of the absolute corruption of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? How corrupt were they? We get a story of guests who are going to be violated in a host's home. Unthinkable in this society. The guest had absolute protection of the host. Absolute. The host was to even put their life on the line or offer themselves, right?
Is God subordinate to the stranger here?
So, well, God forbid we would say God is subordinate. All we can say is that to Abraham, if we read it this way, and I know it's a stretch, but it's okay. I think the rabbis are doing it on purpose, right? They're reading it on purpose this way to say, for Abraham, he knows that to serve the divine is ultimately not about hanging out with the divine. That's why we don't have monasteries, right? To just sit and hang out with God, that's lovely. But the rabbis are misreading this text on purpose to say Abraham understood that true service of the divine is to serve and protect and bring into your home with great dignity and humility the vulnerable.
It's action.
The immigrant, the alien, the person who has no protection and is now in your charge. He runs to meet them. Rots. It doesn't say he ran to meet them and bows to the ground. He is eager to respect and to serve, to welcome, to feed, and to protect the stranger, the alien, the immigrant.
Right. Well, I think to David's point, I think the way to look at it is that whereas God is absolutely on top, our obligations to God don't trump every other obligation. In other words, we have the obligation to hospitality trumps the obligation to hang with God. Our obligation to save somebody who's drowning trumps the obligation not to work on Shabbat.
Can't you find another word?
So yes, there's a hierarchy. Yes, and I think the rabbis would say, or we could say that they're not different.
Right.
God's call for me to live a life of sanctity by not working on Shabbat is important. Unless somebody is drowning. Now, Shabbat is still important.
Right.
And everybody has to keep it. And as soon as I pull that guy out of the water, I'm going to keep Shabbat too. I'm not going to get in my car and go to the mall, right? So that's still important, right? So yes, how I serve God in the moment is defined by the circumstances, right? And so Abraham feels, if we do this stretched reading of the rabbis, Abraham feels comfortable leaving God's presence to go serve God by serving the strangers who have appeared.
So it's not an insult what Abraham's doing.
Correct.
It's the reverse.
Look, I'm not going to say...
It's honoring God.
I'm not going to say it's not chutzpahdik. Right? Like, Abraham's nothing if not filled with chutzpah. Right? It's a little chutzpahdik, but he's also... he's going to argue with God too, like in a little while. So Abraham having kind of a chutzpahdik relationship with God is like a little bit like Moshe and God. Robert?
But there is something else going on that's really important. It's not just this putting God on hold. And as you said, to this present day, it goes on in the few nomadic tribes that are still around. The situation then was that the dangers were so great of living the way these people were living that at any time they could be vulnerable too, and they knew it.
Correct.
And they had to count on their family, the tribe, and maybe even strangers to save them.
100% strangers.
There, but for the grace of God, go I. And
100%.
That is...
And not even the grace of God. Not even the grace of God. It's going to be me.
Right.
It's not like, oh, I hope that's not me. It's going to be me. Next time I have to shear my sheep.
Correct.
And I have to travel for 3 days, right?
It could easily be me.
It will be me. And it'll be my children who are going to have to do business and are going to have to leave the family compound and the family territory. It was going to be everybody understood. It was a universal truth for them. Susan and Dana?
It persists to this day, even if you're not in a nomadic tribe, and we are forgetting it.
What? What? Robert, you think that we're not in touch with this idea? Susan? I'm sorry, somebody did.
Another clarification, I don't mean to anthropomorphize God, but
it's okay.
When we say God's sitting off to the side waiting, I immediately think, no, she is observing and watching. And maybe he's right there with Abraham. Abraham doesn't know it.
Lovely. Lovely. Remind me, I want to close with an Art Waskow piece that goes exactly to this. Jody?
So the 3 men who appeared, who he did not see coming up.
Right.
Would they be manifestations that God just put in front of him to say, let me see how you're going to deal with it?
So a test.
Yeah.
We know about Abraham and some tests, don't we? Yeah. We're going to find out who they are. We find out who they are. Yes.
I just wanted to introduce a little bit of a different perspective. Is that to me it was more of a sign of respect that he was communicating with God, whatever word they were using right now. And it was a sign of respect in terms of the continuity of the communication. I need to attend. But what if we imagine that they were just sitting in a big circle and they were all sitting, and then Abraham was communicating with God, but then he had to say something out of respect. He didn't just leave. He said, this is what, please forgive me. How do we know what those words meant at the time? There might have been a lot of aspects of reverence and respect that we don't get.
I'm giving you. Okay, I'm not disagreeing that he's respectful. He's completely respectful.
No, but
he's completely respectful.
That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that might be the point, because if we paint a picture of the event, then there's God here. But Abraham probably knew God was not just here, but that was his experience in the communication. There was some subject and object. But
exactly.
he knew he wasn't leaving. He wasn't talking to God like a dimwit, like God was a dimwit.
Right. Let me teach you.
I
understand. Let me answer. So my pedagogy is just saying I am hyper reading the stretched reading of the rabbis on purpose. I am not suggesting that version, like Dana said, God goes with him. It is God. Of course. And of course. So I'm not meaning at all to suggest that he's being disrespectful to God. I'm hyperbolizing how the rabbis read it to make a point. Abraham was willing to risk offending God by saying, hang on a sec, please don't leave, I got to take care of something. They read it like that for a reason. Not because they think that's what happened. They read it like that because they're trying to make a point to us Yidden. Right? They're trying to make a point to us Jews. You think it's so great that you hang out with God and you pray 17 hours a day. Good for you. Meanwhile, what's happening at our border? Mispious. Right? You're hanging out with it. That's what they're doing. They're reading it a certain way with a certain cheekiness on the part of Abraham to give us a message. Right? There's lots of ways, as we know in this room, there's lots of ways, right, to read this. And one is exactly that he's just talking to God, right? He's saying, in a sense, I want to fulfill your desire for us, which is to go serve the strangers. Absolutely, 100%.
Well, my point was there's more of a oneness. Whatever the way that it was written originally and the way the rabbis, we don't have to think that it's just God is here and the strangers were there.
100%. Yes. Okay. Like Dana said, God is with Abraham as Abraham visited, and as Art Waskow is going to say, the strangers are God. There's no division there, of course. Okay. So let's go on.
Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour. Knead and make cakes."
So Abraham says, sit below this tree and let me bring you a morsel of bread. Then what does he do? Sarah! Make some bread! This is how it works. This is still how it works. I'm bringing the boss for dinner. Oh, yay. Please come to my home, honey.
You wanted Jody's bread.
Right. Okay.
Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate.
Okay.
Not complete.
So Bert is pointing out the curds of milk and the calf. How could that possibly be? That Abraham served treif?
It's only later the rule was made.
All right. So we don't have Torah yet, right? We don't have Torah yet.
Right.
All right. But of course the rabbis want to say that our patriarchs fulfilled all the laws of the Torah even before Torah was given. All right. And what's the commandment in Torah about milk and meat?
Not really a commandment.
Well,
it says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk.
That's right. So Abraham has not broken any laws. He did not see the kid in its mother's milk. That's all it says in Torah. That's all it says. Don't cook a baby in its mother's milk, and it has to be a sheep. A kid it's a goat, right? Yeah. So don't cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. That's the commandment. Abraham didn't do that. He served veal and labneh, yogurt. Okay, because it's great curds. Okay, so
I love the next line. Where's your line?
So remember that they're eating. Remember they're eating here, right? Which is interesting, right? All right.
So the women didn't eat with the men?
No, of course not. God forbid.
So that's why they said
God forbid. So Elena caught it. What? These are angels. We find out these are malachim. They're angels. Do angels eat? But they ate.
They could know that he has the wife named Sarah.
So, okay, now we're getting ahead. All right.
He heard.
9.
They heard him say Sarah.
But why did he have to say Sarah?
Go.
They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he replied, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind them. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?"
I resent that.
Then,
I resemble that comment.
I'd like to know what.
That's pretty good.
it's going to get...
Sarah says, I totally get this.
You're not so good looking either.
Actually, it's the man saying, who wants to be feeling she's
Right.
Sarah is in her 90s.
Right. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for the Lord? I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son.' Sarah lied, saying, 'I did not laugh,' for she was frightened. But he replied, 'You did laugh.'"
Okay. One of my favorite scenes in Torah.
Okay.
The Malachim say to Abraham, right? Ayeh Sarah ishtecha. Ayeh. Where
Where's
is Sarah? Where have we heard ayeh recently? A form of this word?
Where are you?
Where did we hear that?
In the garden.
In the garden, when God is talking to Adam at the heat of the day, right? In the afternoon, right? Same setting. There's trees here. It's the first time I've ever seen tree, okay. So now it's all starting to line up. God's walking around the garden, right? In the day, right? In the late afternoon, and right, the whole business about trees, and God says, "Ayeka, where are you?" Right? Like God doesn't know where. Of course, God. Right? So it's another kind of question. Ayeka, where are you? Here we have a bunch of trees. We have some eating. It's the heat of the day, and we have malachim. We have divine messengers saying to Abraham, "Ayeh, where? Where's who? Sarah ishtecha." Something they shouldn't know, but he's famous. Abraham. He's a sheikh. He's a pretty famous guy. Maybe they've heard of him. They're coming into his territory. You better know who the big guy is around here, right? The BMOC, and what's his wife's name, and bring her something nice, a candle or something, right? So whatever it is, it's already a little, okay, if they know who, okay. Yes, but they don't know where she is, right? So again, this kind of question is not really about a GPS, right? Piece of information that they're looking for. And he replies, what does he basically reply here? She's where she belongs.
In the kitchen, rattling those pots.
She's in the duh. Like, where do you think she'd be? I'm a good Near Eastern guy, Bronze Age Near Eastern guy. She's in the tent. You think I'd let her walk around unless she's tending the flocks, right? Then one said, "I will return to you." Right? The translation isn't fantastically spot on because it's hard to translate, but "I will return to you next year," meaning at this same season. I will come back at this season, Moed, and Sarah, what's going to happen for her? Bein l'Sarah ishtecha. The Sarah shamat petach ha'ohel. And Sarah heard from where? The petach ha'ohel.
Behind
The opening of the tent. Where was Avraham sitting at the beginning of our parsha? Petach ha'ohel. You have to be at the opening. For you to encounter the divine, you're going to have to be open. You're going to have to position yourself at the opening. The petach here, and now it says the tent is where? It adds this bizarre thing at the end. What does it say? The tent is what?
It was behind where they were sitting and eating.
The tent was behind him. Behind whom? Behind Abraham.
Right.
Why does Torah have to add Vehu acharav? And the tent it's tagged on to the end of the sentence in Hebrew. That the tent is behind him. This is the first time reading this. I've been reading this stuff for how long? A really long time. It's the first time it ever jumped out at me. When he's about to slay Isaac, and the Malach calls, Abraham, Abraham, don't. What immediately happens?
He turns. He's behind him.
Who's behind him? What's behind him? There's a ram. Me'acharav. Behind him. Sarah's in the tent behind him.
Right.
There's a town or a place in Israel called Petach Tikva, which means hope of the doorway or something.
Petach Tikva, sitting at the opening of hope.
Yeah. So that's really nice.
So Sarah now really likes the name of that town.
And don't we still talk at Rosh Hashanah about opening the gate, and we have to be open? That opening and being open is through all of our practices. And then asking, where are you? Where are you right now? And are you open? The gate is open. Are you?
All right, so we have lots of midrashim to write about this, but I want to go on to what Sarah says. Sarah's listening at the tent that now we're told is behind Abraham, as is in a bit the ram going to be behind Abraham. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, which means what? Right, because otherwise there's no reason to tell us this in Torah other than to make it very clear she has stopped ovulating.
Right.
There is no possibility of conception if she has stopped ovulating, at least not natural conception. That's why this point is important. It has to be made extraordinarily clear that this is going to be a non-natural, non-normative pregnancy. Right? So, because it's a miracle, so it has to be clear that it's a miracle. Why else might it be really important for us to know that she has not been ovulating for a while? And that this is a supernatural pregnancy? She got taken into Pharaoh's. Oh yeah.
So that way it couldn't be Pharaoh's.
We have to be very clear. This is not Pharaoh's, and because these stories would have been about priestesses in the past who were part of the sacred marriage, and the sacred marriage was you had sexual relations with the representative of the god. Who would that have been in the ancient world? Either the priest or the king.
So we have a virgin birth in our story.
100% we do. They're gonna. I mean, it gets interpreted that Abraham is the father. The miracle is the conception, not a virgin birth. She's not a virgin.
Right.
She's not in any sense a virgin.
But immaculate conception.
It's not immaculate. It is not immaculate. We don't need immaculate. What is immaculate? Immaculate means without sin. That is not a part of. That has no relevance for us. It is supernatural. But we have to be careful, because these stories are based on a tradition that would have had Sarai having intercourse, sacred intercourse with the king, and would have had a semi-divine child. Yeah. Right? We have to be, so Torah has to be very careful to make sure to understand it is not Pharaoh we're dealing with here. She has not had periods. She was not ovulating.
Right.
Torah could not be more clear.
Right.
So the pregnancy is going to happen now, miraculously, because Yud Hey Vav Hey wants it. Okay.
Amy, just one. Why was the Torah behind? You didn't finish that thought. Why is Torah?
Right. I haven't worked it all out yet, but so what the ram that's behind Abraham? What happens to it? It gets sacrificed on the altar. Do you remember the midrash that says that Satan comes to Sarah and tells her where Abraham and Yitzchak are? Do you remember this? We studied Aviva Zorenberg. Satan comes to Sarah. There's a midrash. Satan comes to Sarah and tells her where Abraham is and what he's doing. And what happens at that moment? She dies. She dies as a result of the Akedah. So the ram that's behind Abraham is sacrificed on the altar at the Akedah, and there is a tradition that so is Sarah. She dies as a result of the Akedah. That's my loose, I haven't worked it all out yet, but that's my loose current interpretation.
So I know that this was written by all men, but I have to say, and it's usually, you follow along, you don't find anything so funny in it, but it is really humorous.
All right, hey, hang on. You're getting ahead of me. All right, here we go. You know that makes me crazy. Okay, here we go. All right. So we are being told very clearly she's not ovulating, right? Could we be more clear that she's not ovulated? Okay. So Sarah, she laughs. How does she laugh?
Inwardly.
Vatitzchak Sarah bikirba. In her midst. In the midst of herself. She laughs. And what does she say? Lemor. Acharei veloti haita li edna ve'adoni. Here we go with Adoni again. Ve'adoni zakein. The Hebrew is very hard to translate, but essentially, she's saying, it's been so like I'm so long not
past there.
I'm so long past there. Haita li edna. V'adoni zaken. Am I to have Edna? No, because what's the next thing she says? Am I to have Edna? Don't read that vav as an and. Read it as a disjunctive vav. Am I to have Edna, but my master zaken? My master's old. I can still have Edna.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, pleasure.
Yeah.
I can still do that. Va'adoni zaken, but my husband is old.
This is before Viagra.
This is way before Viagra. We have to assume that what Sarah, first of all, Sarah knows from Edna. Right? Sarah knows from Edna. So she's not saying I'm incapable of Edna.
But she's saying
She's saying he's old. Right? Right? Well,
Yes.
and it was hilarious to Sarah.
She's laughing.
It was hilarious. Okay, maybe it's hilarious. One interpretation. We have many, many interpretations. One interpretation is it's hilarious. She just busts out.
It's a
like
kidding,
right? You got to be kidding me.
Anything that
Like that's just a joke. That's just hilarious. That's hilarious.
it's just like unlike anything written in Torah. This particular sentence.
It's gorgeous. All right, so
Yeah, it's my favorite.
one laugh is that she is. She just thinks that's hilarious. Like it strikes her as seriously funny, right? That she's going to conceive, right? That he can manage that, right?
Does the rabbis ascribe any importance to there being no record of Abraham's reaction to hearing this news?
No.
Like 4 more years of school. There's some reaction.
Right. Not that I know of, that they really don't talk about Abraham's presumably he will be over the moon. But we know from reading forward, we know that he has a very hard time having to let Ishmael go. Right? So it's a much different reality for Abraham in some ways than it is for Sarah, because the birth of Sarah's, of a child of her body, what is that going to do to Ishmael?
Boot him out.
It's going to, if we remember when we read these stories from the perspective of, ancient Near Eastern women's religion, she's chosen an heir. Sarah has to have an heir. Who's her heir right now? Ishmael. If she has a child of her body, it will replace Ishmael, and it will displace his son, who we know he loves, because God has to comfort him about it. Like, don't worry, the boy's going to be okay. He also will be a great nation. So I think this is a very different reality for Abraham and for Sarah. So one laugh is this is just hilarious that he could get it, whatever. So. But what else? What other kind of laugh might this be? What if it's not because it's funny, or it's a mix of it?
It could be fear.
Because
how can I do this? I'm too old for this.
Panic.
It would panic me.
Right? So panic. I have had many dreams where they tell me I'm pregnant and I panic. Like, wait, what? First of all, how did this happen? Right?
Get that.
You get how that might be like a stretch. Right? How did this happen? And number two, like, wait, wait, what? Like, I've done this. I mean, seriously. And I wake up, like, when you wake up from a dream and and you can barely breathe. And so this happens. This is a recurring nightmare for me. And they're like, feel it, Amy. You can feel the head. So I know it's bizarre, but maybe I've now exposed a little bit too much of my inner life. But Sarah very possibly is panicked, right? Wait, what? I'm going to have labor and delivery for women in the ancient world was
you could die.
You could die.
Yeah.
You or the infant could die, but you get pregnant really old. And the odds are like they go up how much? That she's not going to survive this pregnancy, right? And it's not like we don't know from that.
It's not like she was asking.
And it's not like she was asking. Well, she used to. She used to pray fervently for a child, and now you're going to answer me? Now?
That's true. Yeah.
You decided this was a good time for me to get pregnant? Thank you for that. So. Possibly panic.
Next.
Right? I was just making some challah. What? All right.
We do the next sentence.
So,
my favorite.
Yes, okay. Bert's favorite sentence is next. All right. Then God says to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for me? As for God, I'm coming back. Same season, next year, and Sarah will have a son. So why is that Bert's favorite line?
Because God lies.
God lies
to protect Abraham's self-image.
How does God lie? Where does God lie?
Well, because Sarah said, how am I to have a child because of him? And God says, because she was so old. And saves Abraham from the humiliation that his wife had said that he couldn't do.
Right. So God quotes Sarah as saying, Va'ani zakanti. But I'm so old. Like I'm going to have a baby, but I'm so old. She never uses the word zakein about herself. Right? She uses it about Abraham. So the rabbis can't have God lying, God forbid. So what we learn, say the rabbis, from this is if it's truly to spare someone's feelings, we're allowed to bend the truth. So if I say, do these stripes make me look fat?
No.
Cecile immediately said no, right? There are certain times we know what the answer is because there's no point in telling the truth. Right. They're already out in public in the pants.
All brides are
right?
beautiful.
Like all brides are beautiful. What are you going to say to a bride?
Too.
Really? you chose that dress? You said yes to that dress, right? There are times right? It's just the only right thing to do sometimes is what we normally say is the wrong thing to do, right? Is to not tell the exact truth. So God does not tell the exact truth because God is taking care, according to the rabbis, of Abraham's feelings. And Sarah, though, what is Torah very clear about what Sarah does? Sarah lies. Right? Sarah says, I didn't laugh because she was frightened. Why is she frightened?
It was a nervous laugh. She wasn't really.
Why is she so scared right now, being confronted about laughing?
It was a laugh that hurt him. She was.
Why is she terrified right now? When she
laughed at God. God.
She what?
She laughed at God.
She laughed Bikir Ba.
Right.
She laughed to herself.
Right.
How could anyone know that?
That's right.
Right? Like, yeah. That's why she's terrified. What if you said in your head, he is so old. Are you kidding me right now? He is so old. And then someone comes and says, why did you say that about Abraham? That Abraham's so old. I didn't. What? Like, how could anyone know this? She has every right to be 100% flipped out the front door.
But it's also not a lie because she did not laugh in the traditional sense. She didn't laugh, ha ha ha. She was just thinking, that's ridiculous.
Right? So Torah's characterizing it as she knows that she's saying something not exactly true. But if we really, really get serious about looking at the literal whatever, she does. You're right. She doesn't really lie. She laughed to herself. She didn't laugh out loud, right? But she's been caught in her reaction, whether it was out loud or to herself. She's been called out on her reaction, and what she did, I think what the reason Torah characterizes it that way is because what she's denying is that reaction. Because she's so flipped out, as you can...
God is speaking to Abraham here.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I assume Sarah then is hearing it? Why would she say, I did not laugh?
Right.
Who would she say that to?
Right.
And then my assumption is, but he replied, the he being God. Here, the he is capitalized.
Where?
Sarah said, I did not laugh, for she was frightened, but he replied.
Right. Right.
The he.
Right. So as usual, right, if you take out the capital H, and we're just looking at the Hebrew that has no capitals, it could have been Avraham who says to her, yes, you did, but how would Avraham know she laughed? So that's right, unless he knows Sarah, right? And maybe he knows Sarah well enough to know, 100%, you busted out at that.
Isn't it interesting, too, that we've gone from the 3 apparitions, or men, to 1. We've lost the 3. Yeah.
Well, we don't know that we've lost them. All we know is that only 1 is speaking. If they all spoke at the same time, that would be a little weird. 1 speaks at a time.
Having these immature thoughts, laughing at people, condemning God, like, oh, he's so old. That God knows that we should know that if we're having these demeaning thoughts about people, isn't that sort of the message here?
No. No. Mapitom. They're 90-something. Sarah, come on, help me out here. Wouldn't you laugh? Wouldn't you laugh? I mean, could you condemn her for laughing for someone to say Itzik is going to get her pregnant next week? I love Itzik. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be disrespectful.
Sarah, this is your moment.
Could you...
You know what? I'm not a say you're laughing.
But why is one more laughable? Why is one more suitably laughable than the other?
I laugh And I'm going to tell the story to Itzik, and he's going to laugh.
Good.
I just want to share a different perspective in terms of ultimate Torah. Here's my sense. There was no lie. There was more going on that was written in the Torah, and it's all true.
Terrific.
No lie.
Terrific. Okay, here we go.
And my one example is Sarah laughed inwardly, so she wasn't lying. She was saying, I didn't laugh outwardly.
Yeah, we covered that interpretation. So, yes, 100%. Okay,
100%.
let's go to Waskow, Art Waskow. So we're going back to the three people appearing. We're going back to the Anashim, who we later find out are Malachim, right? We find out they are angels coming to give Sarah a message, coming to deliver this miraculous news. So Arthur Waskow is talking about, well, are they people? Are they God? Are they angels? Like, we often get this confusion when we've seen this lots of places. It's God, it's the angel, is it who's talking, what's happening? And we've talked about that's a device. It's a literary device in order to make things not normal, because it's not normal what's happening here. So the editor knows this is jumbled, but it's a literary device to remind us this is a supernatural encounter. So Waskow says, which I just think is beautiful, I would read this, that the three men, as someone over here said, that the three men were, right, Dana, to your point, the three men were the visible, seeable presence of God. That usually we refuse to see this in each other, and that the breath of life on this occasion made the divine presence in these people totally visible, seeable to Avraham. Then he acted to affirm the holiness of what he now saw was utterly holy by feeding God, who of course is never visible except in all that is around us. That is always visible if we open our eyes. If we saw as Avraham saw, if we never thought we were taking our eyes away from God when we looked with care at human beings on the rest of God's creation, if we looked at the face of each hungry stranger and said, "Oh my God," we would have the radical amazement that Heschel said God calls us toward, and we would stop separating the mundane from the holy.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.